Oh, hello everybody, James Rio here again. I'm talking about CB radios, walkie-talkies, and the use of them. Today I want to touch on the actual use of the radio, and we'll get into the specifics about channels and that when I've had some more information. The one thing that I really want you to remember from this video, if there's only one thing you recall after it, it's that when you're talking on the radio, you need to keep it brief. And that's because it's a shared resource. When you press the transmit button on your radio, you're literally blocking up the airways for everybody else. So it's important to keep your conversation short, to the point, and hopefully necessary or appropriate to whatever's going on in your world. It's easy to talk over everybody else, so you have to be considerate, and that's one of the reasons why people say they say a word at the end of their transmission, like the word over, which I'll get into in a second. So minimize your chatter. In aviation, we have a phrase, ops normal, and that's all you say, and that means that your engine systems are working fine, your fuel consumption's fine, you're on track to make it to your target airport, and you're going to arrive close to your estimated time of arrival. So all of that information is packaged into a simple phrase, ops normal, or operations normal. If there was some sort of emergency that you were facing or involved in, maybe the phrase is all good, means that you don't have any major problems, you don't have a food shortage or any injuries or anything like that. But it's important, and in saying keep it brief, it is important that maybe you repeat the key points. So if somebody tells you to meet at a certain place or at a certain time, maybe it's good to mention the place and time again, just so that you can show that you got the message. Depending on what you're using the radios for or what type of emergency you're facing, sometimes it pays to have some code names for places or for your status. That really, I'd have to leave that to your imagination, but it's important to remember that using a CB radio, it's a public broadcast. So if there's information that you would like to keep private, and for example a person's name, their phone number, their address, or the places that someone's going to, if that's private information, be thoughtful about how you do that. I would suggest what you do is if there's certain places that might be key to what you're doing or how you're going to respond to an emergency, that you give them a code name, just so that if you're going to a private address, you're not giving away someone else's details. It pays to keep a sort of a business-like tone on the radio, and you could even have fun choosing some call signs. And the reason I say that is if you've got several people with similar names, like Harry, Larry, and Barry in your group, it can get very confusing who's calling who, because there's no visual reference, there's no information that shows up on your phone to tell you who's calling. So you might want to have a little bit of fun picking some code or call signs. I don't know, Papa Bear to Mama Bear or something like that. Yeah, I'm sure you'll work out some interesting names, and that just brings a certain clarity about who's calling. Also, there is a phonetic alphabet, which you must have heard people using for when they're spelling things out, like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, and so on. If you want a copy of that, you can either Google it or send me an email, and I'll send you a listing of those correct words to use. And it's important to use the correct words, because that's what most radio operators are expecting. And sometimes a word really does need to be spelled out, because the word that, cat, sat, vat, and rat, for example, all sound very similar, especially on a radio that might have a little bit of static or some background noise or something like that. If somebody says radio silence, that they're really asking for people to minimize their broadcasting completely. And that's a good way to actually operate anyhow, where you only need to comment on what's, you only need to chime into a conversation when something's exceptional. CB radios are a helpful tool. They're not always reliable. Some of the units are not waterproof. And depending on the terrain and the types of buildings between you and the person you're talking to, the range can be quite limited. Just here in New Plymouth in New Zealand, driving around, we've found that 5 kilometres is not unusual to get coverage. But equally, if there's a mountain in between you, or buildings made of concrete or something like that, then even very short distance calls may not work. Just for actual conversations with the radios, please avoid saying over and out. Actually, the modern version for that is clear. Over means I've finished speaking, I'm now listening for your reply or your next statement. Out means I'm not listening. So it would be very rude to say over to you and I'm out. The word Roger actually means received. It doesn't actually mean yes, even though a lot of people imagine it does. The word for yes is affirmative, and the word for no is negative. So affirmative is yes, and negative is no. 10-4 is another phrase that gets used a lot. It also means that I've received the message. Some people also mistake that as a yes. It sort of is if people don't query what you've said. If they said they've received it and they don't query it, then it's kind of understood that they understood. So for using your radios, I think that one of the most challenging things for people is keeping them sufficiently charged up. You don't want to undercharge them, you don't want to overcharge them. You'll just have to read the manual that came with them for the recommendations about how long they need for charging. It's really important that you ensure that the aerial, if you've got one similar to this, is screwed in nice and firmly. Not too tight, but definitely not loose, because that'll make a difference to your transmission. And depending on the type of radio you've got, you'll need to adjust the thing called the squelch, which suppresses background noise and static. It's important you know how to also adjust the volume on your unit, so have a look at that and see if you can work out how to do that. If not, if you've got a specific problem, you're welcome to ask me, but of course I don't have a range of CB radios at my disposal, so it's, we'll work it out through email or a phone call. When you're speaking on the radio, there's a transmit button on the side. Now, there's a phrase used in the radio industry which is a push to talk button. So this is a push to talk transmit button. But actually it should be called hold to talk, because you have to keep pressing it while you're talking. And a very important thing is to remember to stop pressing it when you've stopped talking. Some people, especially in a tense situation, will keep their hand clenched on it. And all that does is it deprives other users from being able to use that channel. It's also a good idea if you're, especially if you're on the move, is to use the little lanyard as a wrist strap that comes with these radios. If nothing else, it makes sure you don't drop it while you're on the move, basically. It's also good with the people that you're likely to call to have a couple of other channels in mind for calling each other on. And the reason for that is that if the channel that you normally use gets too busy, you might be able to find those people on the other channels that you've pre-decided. So that's it. That's the learning for today. I would really like to hear from anybody who's very familiar with the use of channels here in Taranaki in New Zealand, because I'm not, and I'd like to include that in the next video so that people know how to use them. So remember to plan your communications to some extent, what you're going to say, just so that you can say it as briefly as possible. It's worth learning some of the 10 codes, 10-4 and things like that. So if you want a copy of those codes, just email me. And what else can I tell you? Oh, and learn that alphabet. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, because that's what people expect to hear when you're spelling something on the radio for clarity. Alright, I've finished, so I'm clear.